A few thoughts for Leil Seder, the night on which we get together and go through the Haggadah text, which is such a masterpiece that one could spend the whole year just discussing every part of it. But at the core of the Haggadah lies the mitzvah, Min HaTorah, one of the 613 mitzvahs of V'higadata Levincha Bayom Hahu, of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We tell the story of the redemption from Mitzrayim 3,500 years ago. The Klal Yisrael redeemed from slavery into freedom. Everybody knows that. But the question is really, what is the real story for Seder night? What is the narrative that we are really telling on Seder night? Is it only that classic move from slavery to freedom? So here we have a very fascinating debate in the Gemara between two of the greatest rabbinic leaders of the 3rd century in Bavel, between Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel were, the Rav was the Rosh Yeshiva and the Rav of the town Surah, and Shmuel was the town of Nahardar, and between them, they really were the main voices of Torah and rabbinic leadership in their generation. And they discuss with each other, what really is the narrative that we're talking about? So Shmuel gives the obvious answer. Avodim hoyinu lefara b'Mitzrayim, v'yotzienu Hashem misham, a paragraph that we see in the Haggadah, which is the classic answer to the question, what is the story, what happened to us, what happened to the Jewish people? But Rav says that's not really the whole story. Rav comes along and says, of course, that's a story to tell, and we need to say it, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. But really, that story is only half or maybe less than half the story. The real story is, Mitchila ovdei avodah zara hayu avoseinu, v'achshav kervanu hamokom la'avodoso. Another paragraph in the Haggadah. And this one is really an alternative narrative to that of Shmuel. He's telling a different story. This is not the story of slavery to freedom. This is not a national story of a people coming into their own independence. This is a story of a spiritual journey made by Avram, Sarah, Yitzhak and Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel and Leah. They made this journey from paganism, atheism, materialism, brutality of the ancient world into a world of chesed, a world of emunah, and a world of avodas Hashem. How does one make that journey? That, in a sense, brings the whole story of Seder night is much more gripping and more personalized, because this is a story that is relevant to every individual of Klal Yisrael in every generation. In a sense, we are all on that journey still today. Maybe the transition from slavery to freedom took place 3,500 years ago, but actually the real underlying journey, the spiritual understanding, right, to understand the emptiness of a world without mitzvot, without chesed, without the deeper understanding of being a member of Am Yisrael and Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kodesh. That story is the really important story of Leil Seder. But the two are intertwined. And hence, as the Rambam brings down, the Hilchos Chametz Matzah, chapter 8, we say both the version of Rav and the version of Shmuel. And this is part of the beauty of the Haggadah text, that it is at the same time answering the question of how did Am Yisrael come into existence? How did we come to be the people that we are? How did we come to be created and to be formed in the shape that we are and to become this amazing and powerful nation of Am Yisrael? That is really the first question. But there's another question, an underlying question, which goes to the real heart of the whole of Leil Seder, and that is, how did we come to have a covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How did we come to be a people who are really bound up with the Creator of the world in such a way that the Jewish people have become an indestructible people, a people who have a sense of the infinite, an Am HaNetzach, a people who have a sense of the transcendent, that we're always connected to the powers that are beyond the physical world, that somehow we have something which the non-Jewish world can't quite grasp. And that something came about not just because of from slavery to freedom. Many nations went from slavery to freedom. But Klal Yisrael made that transition, and while at the same time making the spiritual journey of Mitchila Ovde Avodah Zarah Hoyu Avosenu. And everybody's aware of the fact that in our generation particularly, there are many thousands of people, of Baalei Tshuva, who have made that journey very dramatically. Everybody makes that journey all the time. But lots of people who have simply come from a world without mitzvot and discovered the meaning and purpose of a life with mitzvot, that is really a story of Leil Seder. And really the main, even though the questions that are being asked are Manishtana Halayla Hazeh, the underlying question that is being asked is, how did we come to be a unique nation with unique strengths and an indestructible spiritual core, which gives us such a tremendously important role to play in history, a very important connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in fact a destiny which will ultimately bring redemption to all of mankind. These are the questions which really are to be discussed on Leil Seder. Part of the Haggadah also gives us the four sons. And I always find that a very fascinating psychologically and educational part of the Haggadah. The four sons ask different questions, right? The Chacham asks, tell me, I'm intellectually interested. To what is the difference in the Chukim and Mishpatim? How did we come to have all these different mitzvahs, and what do they mean? What does each one mean? What's it all about? Right? The Rasha simply says, Mo avodas es lachem. He asks a hostile question of what's it all worth? Why do we need all this? Right? The Tam is a bit bewildered. Mazo is not quite sure what's going on. And Sheina der Lishal doesn't even know what questions to ask. He just lives in a world of Jewish life and he does things. Why does he have them? Why does he do them? Because tradition. Why tradition? Where does it come from? Who knows? But that's what we do. That's Sheina der Lishal. Says the Sfas Emes, a very beautiful insight. He says every human being, actually within him or within her, has all these four different components at different stages of your life, confronted with different parts of Jewish obligations and Jewish strengths. One asks different questions. Sometimes we ask intelligent questions. We want to get to the bottom of the mitzvah. Why is it that we keep Shabbos? Why do we put on tefillin? Why are we connected so strongly to Eretz Yisrael? What is it about these mitzvot which really are so compelling and so profound? That's a question of the Chacham. Every now and again, we feel ourselves rebelling, a moment of rebellion, of Moha Avoda Hazos Lachem. Who needs this? Why do I need this particular mitzvah? Why am I restricted in this particular way? I want to live a different way of life. Why do I need to be only eating these foods and not those foods? Why do I need to travel only here and not there and not on Shabbos? And why is all this happening? And that rebelliousness is part of human nature. And then there are some mitzvahs which we are just bewildered by. We're not quite clear what's going on at all. It's just an inexplicable to us, and we simply ask, Mazos, what's going on? And then there is Shein der Lishal, actually, the ignorance that we all have. That not only do we not know a lot of Jewish knowledge, but we don't even know how much we don't know. There are whole areas of Jewish understanding and Jewish and Torah knowledge which we don't even realize that we don't have them. And therefore, in that sense, we every now and again, we hear a shir or open a book or hear somebody talking, suddenly we realize, gosh, the level of our ignorance is massive. And this is four different aspects of a human being. And we come to Leil Seder bringing with us all these four different attitudes. And we need to find out the answers to these questions. What is really unique about Am Yisrael? Why really have we reached the place that we've reached? And how are we really going to move ahead? But what's beautiful is, Chazal tell us, that Pesach is not only a commemoration of a past event of a Geula. It's not only an event that took place in the past, but actually within Pesach, there is the Shoresh, there is the root of all future geulot. Every single future geula, whether it's a personal geula, a personal redemption, or a national redemption, all has its roots in Pesach. And that's why Pesach is so crucial to our identity and to our future and to our spiritual energy. And that's why Chazal tell us that this time of year, not only b'Nisan Nigalu did the original redemption come about in Nisan, but b'Nisan Asidim Ligael. We will in the future get our redemptions through Pesach. And that is really the secret of the Leil Seder, why it has given us so much strength, why it is so fascinating, because it really goes to the core of what does it mean to be a member of Klal Yisrael. And I'll just end up with a conversation I had this afternoon with an elderly gentleman who sits next to me in shul in Efrat. And I've become friendly with him. And I invited him to Kiddush a few weeks ago. And I discovered that he's a man, he comes with his wife, he's a man in his late 80s from Budapest, and he's a retired nuclear physicist. And he's been working in Israel his whole life, whole professional life, teaching physics and working in the area of nuclear physics. And an amazing man, a man who sits, who learns, who comes to shul 3 times a day, 7 days a week, a very dedicated, intelligent, deep-thinking person. And as we're coming out of shul, he says to me, I was thinking today about Pesach 1945 in Bergen-Belsen. I must be honest with you, it caught me a little bit by surprise. I wasn't really emotionally geared for having that kind of conversation, but it gripped me very powerfully. He says, I was 9 years old in Pesach 1945 in Bergen-Belsen, and I was with my grandfather and 1 or 2 other members of my family who had managed to survive. And what struck me amazingly was, we got every day a small crust of old bread, and that was really our main sustenance, our only sustenance. And my grandfather absolutely would never eat chametz on Pesach. I knew it was Pesach because my grandfather wouldn't eat chametz. If he was lucky, he managed to exchange it for a piece of potato or something along those lines, a piece of carrot or turnip. But sometimes he didn't eat anything at all. Because for him, the idea of eating chametz on Pesach went to the heart, not just of the things that he did, but who he was. For all of us, Pesach goes to that deep root. Who are we, and how did we come to be the people that we are? If we can read the Haggadah at a deeper level and ask all the questions that we can ask, the intellectual ones, the rebellious ones, the bewildered ones, and realizing the extent or lack of our knowledge, all this will come to bear on the question of how Am Yisrael became the Am HaNetzach, the people who are really connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this unique way. And that Be'ez Hashem, this Pesach, we will lay the foundations of our personal redemption from all those things which are constraining us and bothering us and limiting us in so many different ways. And we will be able, Be'ez Hashem, to see a Geula in this Nisan as well, to be able to sing a song, Al Geulosenu, Al Padus Nafshenu, both for our national Geula and our personal redemption, V'chein Yehi Ratzon.